As we kind of launch into this, I'm Chris Long. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and SCP for Government Affairs at Better Medicare Alliance. I'll turn it over to my colleagues here from Capitol Hill Consulting Group, but we just did a little bit of an account of how many collective years of experience you have here, and I'll take at least half of it, but I think we're at about 70 years of experience right here of working with people on Capitol Hill. We've seen a lot. We don't know a lot, but we do know that doing what we do is critically important because these are the people that make the decisions that impact the lives of beneficiaries very directly. And if we're not having these conversations, their voices aren't being heard. So I will pass it off to Chris Davis first. Chris, let you introduce yourself and then give a little bit of a perspective on what it's like to engage with Democratic lawmakers and also the work that you do in particular with members of committees of jurisdiction which impact our work.
Yeah, absolutely. So excited to be here today chatting with y'all. My name is Chris Davis. I've been at Capitol Hill Consulting Group for about 2 years now. Had the pleasure of working with Better Medicare Alliance and a range of other folks in the Medicare Advantage space. But I've been in DC doing health policy for about 18 years now. I did 5 years on Capitol Hill for a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee handling healthcare. And then as happens in DC, he lost re-election. So I've been lobbying since then across a range of industries, including the generic drug, PBM, and health insurance industry. In my time lobbying, I've worked for a Democratic member of Congress on the Hill and focused on the Democratic side of the aisle in lobbying. And I think that particularly in Medicare Advantage, we've seen some challenges in the last few years around lobbying on the Democratic side on MA. I think as you see across the spectrum, whether it's in the presidential primaries or congressional primaries, there is an increasingly vocal progressive wing of the party, which often is not particularly friendly to anyone in the healthcare industry that is for profit at all. And so I think that this is a challenge that we're certainly seeing on the Hill right now. I mean, obviously, you see a lot of the Medicare for All debate when we're talking about presidential elections and congressional primaries, and that translates with members on the Hill as well. So I think that we've seen, increased scrutiny from the progressive wing of the party around Medicare Advantage, and that's where organizations like BMA and all the allies here are so important in spreading that message that it's not just health insurance companies we're talking about here, but it's seniors organizations and it's seniors who are really benefiting from this. I think the other piece I would add is, that having been said, there is very strong support for Medicare Advantage among a broad spectrum of Democrats on the Hill. And I think that what we're increasingly seeing, and rightfully so, since MA is more than 50% of all seniors now, an increased interest in looking at reforms of the program. And I think this is a place in particular where, BMA has been so thoughtful around looking at things like electronic prior authorization, looking at marketing to seniors, policies that help improve and strengthen the program, but still being sure that it allows that seniors still have access to the important benefits that it provides.
Brian, would you like to give a perspective from where you sit?
Sure. Brian Sutter. I've been at Capitol Hill Consulting Group for 10 years now, and we are glad to bring Chris on board a couple of years ago. He really added a lot of value and reach, and so we're excited to have him. I spent 12 years on the Hill before that. I started as the kid answering the phones that you saw when you would walk in there, but it happened to be right around the passage of the Medicare Modernization Act. And so I really got to see Medicare Advantage come into its own from the old Medicare Plus choice. And why was that? Because of all of the extra benefits that were being offered, and more members of Congress wanted to see them in their district. And so that's really where I got to see Medicare Advantage firsthand as my boss, Dave Camp, was on the Ways and Means Committee. And I spent 12 years all the way through with him, spent it in his personal office, and then ultimately at the committee, where I spent 4 years as a policy staffer dealing with MA and a lot of the issues, seen it from both sides of Republicans being a majority to Democrats being in the supermajority, really, that brought us the ACA and all of the changes So I think the one takeaway I have, and I think Chris alluded to it, is that the challenges to MA and to the Medicare program are always changing. And so we always have to be continuing up there, talking about what we do in a positive way and talking through the issues. I will say on the Republican side, it's a new Congress. We've seen this over the last several years, and so the challenges are new. I think we heard Mr. Guthrie yesterday talk about some of that. We have some really, really smart people that want to continue to be invested in it, but we've got to get up there and talk about the program. And I think the one misconception to Medicare Advantage is it's all the same, and we all know that it's not, right? Every community is different. Every state is different. There's a lot of different styles of delivery that are brought into Medicare Advantage. So while we talk about it generically and with this big broad brush, it is very, very local. And so I would encourage all of you, as you're talking to policymakers, staff, members, whomever, talk about what you're doing in a local sense. How are you delivering care? That gets lost quite a bit. That's what we do on a regular basis as we're going around the Hill. We see headlines and this or that. Some member will say something. We'll go educate them. Hey, this is actually what's happening in your state. Did you know that? And a lot of times they're surprised, whether that's relationships with employers, local unions, other delivery groups, or how those benefits are structured. That is the most important thing that we can do. So, and we couldn't do that and tell that story without all of you being active partners and telling us about the good work you're doing. Chris and I are just the messengers. We don't actually do it. You all do, and your groups do it. So thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And I think you're being a little bit coy there. You provide a lot of wisdom as we march up to the Hill. You know, for those of us that get to spend a lot of time up there, it becomes a little bit of second nature on how you approach offices. From your experience in Medicare Advantage, how do you think it's best to approach, let's just say, the 80 plus new freshman offices of both sides of the aisle that we're going to have next year in communicating the message of Medicare Advantage? And I'll pass it off to both of you, and then I can give my perspective.
Yeah, you want to start?
Yeah, so I do a lot of education efforts with new members of Congress, just coming in and saying, I don't know anything about Medicare. Maybe I was familiar with Medicaid or my local hospital systems, but what is this Medicare thing? How is it financed? How does Medicare Advantage work? And I think you really have to start from the basics of what is fee for service. It is a 1965 Blue Cross Blue Shield product that no longer exists. And that is the benefit of Medicare Advantage that brings it all together. And that's true. It provides, the common sense insurance product that most of us are used to today. We may not always love it, but we're used to it and we know how to work inside that system. Fee for service is a completely outdated dinosaur. And I think about it, and you talk about it in terms like that. You talk about the benefits it provides and how we're able to do care coordination and bring things to that whole individual. That's where they understand it. But you really have to start at a very basic level about what it is. And then you can talk about what it isn't, and we can get into some of the more detailed policy that you might read in the newspaper. But if you don't have a good understanding of what it is and what it's trying to overcome, then you don't have the right frame of reference.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think I always kind of describe this that I think lobbyists have a tendency to do sometimes, which is start in the middle of the conversation. And you'll go in, you'll be talking to a staffer, and you'll say, "Here's why supplemental benefits are great, and here's why we need to make sure the rate notice is sufficient for this year." And you have a staffer sitting there saying, "I don't know what supplemental benefits or the rate notice are." And so I think that that's where, to Brian's point, we like to start this early. We talk to candidates. We're talking to dozens of candidates right now and have been for months now, and talking about, what Medicare Advantage is, offering us as a resource to them on healthcare policy, getting in very early with folks. So then, that we're not, when the rate notice pops up in January, we're not suddenly introducing ourselves for the first time to them. I think back to when I first started handling healthcare on the Hill in 2006. And I always joke that my first day of being a healthcare policy staffer for a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I had to Google which one is Medicaid and which one is Medicare. So you have a lot of, 23, 24-year-olds who are just kind of getting things thrown at them. And that's, I think, where we come in. I think that's one of the parts of the job I love the most, is being able to, not just go up there and try to influence policy, but actually really educate people and be a resource to these younger staffers up there.
And I think the one thing I'll add is know that this is a conversation. This is not a meeting, right? This is going to be an ongoing conversation. And the best results that we can have, and even in a hostile office, is that we're going to go in and we're going to explain things. And we may agree to disagree today, but can I come back?
Mm-hmm.
We always want to come back. And we're going to go back and visit that office, hopefully several times over the course of the year. Again, like Chris, as a staffer in an individual office, the best thing that happened was I got to see the same people year after year on their fly-ins.
Mm-hmm.
We developed a rapport and a relationship. And so when things did come up, I had a resource that I trusted back home and I could call them. Mm-hmm. That was invaluable to me. So be that invaluable resource as you're going around.
Yeah. And, I think I would just add, I think that, having, worked with, BMA for a while now, both, at CHCG and in some of my former roles in the insurance industry, I think that that's where, BMA has been able to provide so much value, particularly to committee staffers and leadership staffers, in terms of, providing this, this data, this real world example, the allies who do this every day, the policy solutions where, we're not just going up there saying, no, don't do this. We're saying, here's how we can proactively help you and provide positive, value to you in your work.
And I appreciate all those comments, and in particular, Brian, the part about this being a relationship. Those of us that do this realize that these are not difficult situations. These are not difficult jobs to have up on Capitol Hill. These are very difficult jobs to have on Capitol Hill. And one thing that is important for our team collectively is the value of the relationship. The number of times that we have seen a staff assistant who, for those of you who are not familiar with Hill titles, is the person that's at the front desk end up being the chief of staff within a year or two. Mm-hmm. And then being somebody that has an immense influence over a federal program like Medicare Advantage happens a lot more often than we know. So from the moment we walk into the office to the moment we leave an office, our demeanor, but most importantly, our integrity is important. This is all about integrity and giving the information that the staffer and staff and then the member needs and wants. So I do have a question for you all that I think is, it's not a softball because it's a difficult question because we're all in the bubble here. But one thing that I feel like that we're seeing in advocacy generally is it's still important to do what we do on the Hill, but there's a lot of things that need to happen and can happen with members at home. They are more at home than they are here. And would love your impressions about if you think that is correct and how do we solve for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, at the end of the day, members of Congress are responsible to their constituents. And I think that when they are hearing directly from, whether it's a seniors organization or a provider group, whoever it may be in the district, and then seniors directly, I think that that's where, we can go in and explain the policy and explain the downsides and the benefits of a particular policy. But at the end of the day, they're responsible to people back home. And so I think that that's where, having seniors call, doing these roundtables, having seniors visit the district offices and meeting with the members and the district staff there directly. That's so very important. And I think that I think the two really work hand in hand together.
Well, and I think, we happen to be in Washington, D.C. on the verge of an election where if you read the papers, we're talking about a government funding bill. And then as soon as that passes, they're gone. And we won't see them here in Washington, D.C. until after the election, which means they're home, right? And they need votes if they want to come back. Most of them want to come back. Some of them don't, and they don't care. But I think you use that to your advantage, right? Don't forget that they are people and they are asking for your vote. They need to hear from you. And I do a lot of speeches to folks that come in and they say, "Oh, my vote doesn't matter. How do I do this?" You see these national polls, and we just had a great session about all of the polling. You think about it, the average congressional district says 700,000 people in it. When you look at these polls, we're talking about registered voters. about half of all of those 700,000 are registered voters. So take half and take it off the books. So that's 350,000. When you look at how close some of these polls are, talking 51-49, that means half of that 350 are actually voting for a candidate, right? So you're talking down to about 170,000 people are deciding who is going to be the person that is elected for 700,000 people. When you start doing the math like that, and then who actually shows up, registered voters versus likely voters, again, we're down to half. So you could actually think between 85 and 170,000 people are dictating what one congressional district does. Your vote matters. So not only your vote, but your friends' vote, and the folks in your organization, you really do have an impact on these elections, and they need your vote to come back. That's a great opportunity to do that. And then what I would just say is once now's the time. They're going to listen. They need you, right? It's 6 weeks, and they need every vote they possibly can. Don't let that be the last time they hear from you. Talk to them after they win. Talk to their staff back home. I want you to come back to my center. I want you to come see when you're back in and you're not focusing just on campaign and the next event. Spend some time with me. Develop that relationship. So use this time when they're listening to parlay that into the next one.
Yeah. Well, I'd say I was just reminded of the 2020 election when there were one House seat in New York that was after Election Day under 100 votes and one in Iowa that was under 10 votes. So to your point about every vote mattering.
And as a reminder for everybody, including myself, or especially myself, Alaska has one representative that counts on that 150,000 plus votes. Places in Manhattan have it in a block. So once a lot of what we need to do is adjust who we speak to and how we speak to them, and geography matters a great deal. So one question I've gotten repeatedly as we've been through here the last 2 days is, does it matter what party really is controlled? They just don't get anything done. And I think from the outside, the perspective is true. They don't get it. We're not in a zone right now where we're getting massive generational changing pieces of legislation done. But I do believe it matters, and I'd love for y'all to speak to it, unless you disagree with me.
Certainly agree on that. I think that, it is true that, in a divided government like we have right now, you're not seeing an Affordable Care Act or an Inflation Reduction Act or kind of these massive, to your point, like generational changing bills. But, every year you have the appropriations process. You have, dozens of what should be routine reauthorizations, and depending on who's in power, it can go in a wildly different direction. And there is bipartisan cooperation on a lot of these issues, but there's cooperation, but then you have the one in the majority who's actually kind of dictating that. So it absolutely does matter. And you see a big difference both in and also I think in prioritization of what they're going to bring up, what is coming up first, what those top priorities are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about the prioritization. It really does matter. Like I said, I was fortunate enough to see majority, Republicans majority as a Republican. That was great. I was in the deep minority when the Democrats were in charge of everything. I think honestly, the most effective time is split government. I think that's where you really have to know what you stand for, what your priorities are, and you have to be willing to make a trade. I think right now we're in that environment because of the election cycle. We're not willing to make that trade. It is a big presidential election year. We saw that early as February or March, of everybody saying, nope, 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 we're not doing anything. We're going to wait till the next guy or gal, as it were. So I think there's an opportunity. So yes, the parties matter. I think about it more as like, how do we get to the 80%? There are the parts on either side that don't want to do anything with anybody else with that same initial after their name. That's unfortunate, and I think the House is kind of right now in a mix with that, right? Look at the vote today on keeping the government open. It should be an easy vote, and it had been for decades, and all of a sudden it's really, really hard right now. I hope, and it seems to me, that coming out of this election, there's going to be more that look across party lines and want to get something done regardless of who's in power to Chris's point, talking to a lot of candidates. They're fed up like you all are, right? They're here to make a difference. And that's the type of people we need. And I'm always an optimist. The glass is going to be half full because you have to be here. You have to be here for the right reasons to want to make positive change. If not, be one of those guys that says, I'm not coming back ever again. So that's kind of the lens I view, less about the parties, but more about how do we get stuff done.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was a really interesting thing we saw last year, kind of to that point of the, 10%, 20% on either end doesn't do anything. You did see an interest, a very unusual in the House, which is, a very, majority rules institution, for things like the big deficit deal and the debt ceiling deal. You saw this interesting governing majority of about 130, 140 members on each side of the aisle coming together to pass those bills, which was really, and I think that's where, I think you do see an increasing number of candidates who are coming in saying, I want to be a part of that group that's getting that done, of this working majority that is willing to work across the aisle. You see things like the Problem Solvers Caucus, where you have equal number of Democrats and Republicans on either side who are trying to bridge that divide and I think bring back some of that, older school. We always sound very old when we talk about back in the day of bipartisan cooperation, but who are really trying to bring that back.
Yeah, there was a time where they legitimately liked each other and liked to work with each other. And I think talking to the candidates that on both sides feel like that there's a turn a little bit back to that, or at least a desire to make it. So, if I was a new member of Congress coming in, and you all were supposed to talk to me about Medicare Advantage in the first 6 months of 2025, there are some big things that are happening in the background. We have a debt limit. We have potentially a continuing resolution to resolve. And we have expiring tax credits for both the former president's tax cuts as well as the ACA subsidies. Most of those decisions, unless we go to an emergency situation where we push it to the end of the year, which we can't with the debt limit, are all going to crash upon a new member of Congress's desk between April and June. Mm-hmm. How would you advise a member of Congress to navigate that and also remember that certain programs are very important for their constituents?
Well, it's funny you asked that question. I actually had an opportunity to talk to a new member of Congress, potentially a new member of Congress, yesterday about this topic. And I said, keep your powder dry. What we have seen in the last few years is member of Congress coming in, especially on my side of the aisle. I will never, and fill in the blank, I will never vote for a debt ceiling increase. I will never raise taxes. I will, never cut Medicare. I will never do any of these things. And I said, well, you will. Mm-hmm. You will at some point. So careful what you promise, right? Keep your powder dry. Get smart. Talk to your colleagues on the committees. If you're a freshman member of Congress, you're on the Small Business Committee. You're on the Agriculture Committee or the T&I Committee. You're not on Energy and Commerce or Ways and Means Appropriations, generally speaking, in the House. So go talk to your members that are in your delegation on that. Ask where they've been. Ask where the pitfalls are. Get yourself really, really smart on those issues, both from a policy perspective, but then also a local perspective. That's one of the best things about being in the House that I much appreciate. While my boss was on Ways and Means, I had friends on Energy and Commerce and Appropriation. Hey, what do I need to know, right? Build that network. So that's what I told them to do. And I think that then gives us and others an opportunity to say, okay, this is, again, the local stuff that's really, really good that's happening. Make sure your colleagues know. So when you're educating members and staff, know that you may be educating the whole delegation because they do share information that way. I know I certainly did.
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right. I think, on the Democratic side, there are two groups in particular that we do a lot of work with. The Blue Dog Coalition, which is kind of the more conservative members, and then also the New Democrat Coalition, which are these kind of business, more moderate members as well. And I think that's exactly where, I think one of the biggest benefits for those members in those groups is getting that guidance from senior members of the coalition who have the policy expertise, who have the political expertise, who've seen, there's some of the same debates that we were having 10, 15 years ago in healthcare we're still having today. And they've, seen that before. And I think that's kind of that value of community that these coalitions bring. And I have seen this with a lot of members who come in saying, I'm not a joiner, I'm going to go out on my own, I'm good. And then a month in, they're like, why don't I know anything that's happening? And it's like, oh, well, that's, because there are these groups that do that and kind of provide that value. So I think that's exactly right. And I think that they, give a different perspective necessarily than just your leadership, who obviously want to support you and want to help the members. But they have, kind of a different perspective on you wanting to fall in line at all times.
Yeah, I recall a member of Congress saying that anybody says that they can accomplish something in the first 24 hours, you need to be suspicious of, just because at the first 24 hours, it's hard to even know where to get your vote card.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't know how many of y'all have been to swearing in day on Capitol Hill when the members are getting sworn in, but every office has an open house and you stop by their offices and they don't have computers yet. They don't have trash cans yet. The walls are empty. Sometimes their phones aren't even working. So exactly right. That first, month, they're, figuring out the extreme basics of how an office works.
And we're trying to figure out who they are.
Exactly.
As well. So want to go back a little bit to what we were talking about in terms of the challenges for the MA program in the next 3 months. Let's just say through the end of December and then into next year. And I feel like we're about to see a tidal wave of people asking, how are we going to pay for blank? How are we going to pay for blank? How are we going to pay for blank? And for those of y'all that don't speak weird legislative talk, pay for really means where are we going to take money from to pay for something? And when you talk about paying for tax cuts for people that already have them, it's very hard to tell people that they're not going to remain with their current tax situation. The ACA subsidies would be not paying for those would be a seismic shift in the healthcare market. So you squeeze it all down, somebody's got to pay for all of this. How do you see this playing out? And if you can't see it playing out, how would you instruct us and what to watch for?
So I would think, taking the smaller question first, the easier one. What happens?
I'll take the hard one.
Yeah, you get the hard one.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, I think between now and the end of the year, right? I think that's kind of more tactical. What are we paying for? There's always healthcare extenders and small little programs that Congress wants to pass, and those cost money. Telehealth that was enacted as part of the pandemic, those authorities and allowing them to continue on is very, very popular. Those cost a few $1 billion. How do we find that in the couch cushions of Congress to pay for it? I would say in a divided Congress like this is, given the short and compressed time frame, having been at that table before and been tasked with coming up with some of these offsets and pay-fors, you really need to have what we call four corners agree to this. So the House and Senate leadership and the Senate leadership on a bipartisan basis all agree to it. All of the committees agree to it. If there's somebody that's screaming, you can't do this, or this is wildly objectionable, it doesn't happen. And so there are some things that are out there that I think are palatable, and it's going to be a small package at the end of this year. So I think the risk for us right now is not high. I think we just stay on our toes and continue to push Congress to say, no, these would have detrimental effects to seniors, and we need to be really thoughtful on how we do it. I think the challenge is looking forward to next year. You're right. We are going to have a debt limit. We are about $33 trillion in debt. We're spending more on the interest payments to debt than national security. It's a real concern. We're going to have some major, major issues. Continuing the tax cuts from Trump, which were $1.5 trillion a few years ago, are almost $4 trillion. The ACA subsidies are significant, near $1 trillion or $2. So we can't cut Medicare. That would be cutting all of Medicare to pay all of those things. We can't do that. It won't happen. The question is, what do we do? What kind of scenario do we bring up? And I think there is some real exposure there for MA that we have to be thoughtful about. It is half the Medicare Advantage enrollment. It's a growing piece. But there's some really good stories to tell. And the reason that Medicare has been able to ward off some of the financial burdens that the trustees and others have thought about over the years is because we've kept some downward pressure, because we've done the good things that fee-for-service and supplemental insurance has not been able to do. So that's a really good story that we need to tell. So it's like, hey, yes, it's a big part of the program, but if you do this, here are the unintended consequences, and we were really concerned about that. I think that's what we're going to do and continue to do. And we have to just kind of press on every single level to make sure that message gets through, and just do our best to ward off really bad things from happening. But there are some significant financial issues that are facing Congress next year.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that one thing that we've really seen, particularly with these very large packages like the debt deal next year and the tax deal will be, is you have the legislation go through the normal committee process. House passes something, Senate passes something, but then it's the leadership in the room, and it's 10, 15 staffers and members hammering out that final deal. And that's where you need those 10, 15, 20 members who will go to leadership and say, this is my top priority. Do not include cuts to Medicare Advantage to pay for this. And I think that, that's something that, we see every year through the MA rate notice process is, who are those 10, 15 members who are going to call the White House, call the CMS administrator, call the HHS secretary, call leadership and say, no, this is a top priority for me, for seniors in my district. We can't do this. And I think, and that's the situation, I think that we'll, potentially could find ourselves in next year. And that's where, so much of the work that we do, both in DC and as we were talking about earlier, back in the district, is, really developing those champions who have that deep understanding and support of the Medicare Advantage program. So when the rubber hits the road, they're out there defending the program.
And I think it's just to think about the changes that are coming to Congress on both sides of the aisle. We talk about leadership kind of as this amorphous being. It's not. It's members of Congress. They are elected by their peers, whether that's the Speaker of the House or the Majority Leader in the Senate that we recognize. There's a lot of other people that sit around that leadership table. If I would have asked any of you 2 years ago who Mike Johnson was, would have you been able to raise your hand and said he's the next speaker? No, I couldn't have done that. So what I would say is, as you're thinking about these relationships and these members, you don't know where that local congressman, my boss, Dave Camp from Midland, Michigan, who, right? He was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He was very close friends of John Boehner. He had his ear, right? The members that you're talking to in these local districts will have the ear of somebody important. You just don't know when or how. And that's kind of how DC works. You continue to make the relationship and build it. So when there is a time, you send that email, you make that call, you get a group of folks together and say, man, this is going to be really, really harmful to our program. We need you to do something. And then you activate a champion. It takes a long time to build a champion. Once you've built them, then you activate them. And that's really what you want to do at the right time. So that's how you have to think about it in this relationship.
Yeah, well, and I think very similarly on the Democratic side in leadership. I mean, my entire career in DC, since 2003, when you had Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn in the top three on the Democratic side. And then suddenly we now have, 3 new members in leadership, and Hakeem Jeffries, Catherine Clark, and Pete Aguilar, who have been elected within the past 15 years, I think. And, I think that we'd seen a wave over the years as there were the various rumors of the old big three kind of stepping down from leadership of, here's the next person who's going to be in leadership. And so it's one of those things where you kind of never know. And I think that's where, to that point of, building those relationships early, a freshman member now is a member on Energy and Commerce or Ways and Means a couple years from now, or maybe in leadership a few years after that.
Thank you. I think it's fascinating and right that neither one of y'all wanted to say how we were going to find $3 trillion in a way to pay for all of this. I don't have the answer either. So, I think one of the things that we hear often, and I think you touched on it a little bit, in the bubble we'll sometimes say, well, that member, doesn't matter. They're not on a committee. They're not with us. And I think when I do speaking outside of the the DC area political world, I was like, people ask me what I do, and I was like, I get to work with the 535 most powerful people in America, and each one of them is a picture of the people that they come from in terms of what they believe, how they are politically aligned, and the vast majority of them are here and they really want to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
They really want to do right by the people that elected them. Typically, the ones that don't end up are being on the news and you hear about them, to be frank. So as we think about that, that becomes a very big map. But MA is growing in every corner of the United States right now. What is your advice to BMA, and then on to our allies that are here? How do we get this message across to all the members, not the ones that we just happen to think of as being more important than?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think that, if, knock on wood, as a Democrat up here, if Democrats win back the majority next year, we'll see somewhere from 10 to 12 new members on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. That's almost a third of the committee will be new members, will be those members that, some people may say don't matter. And so I think that it's exactly that. It's, and then there is a tendency, I think, among folks in DC to that point also of not talking to them until they get on committee. And then members have kind of made up their mind on a lot of issues by then. And so it's getting to know, once, as we were saying earlier, I think it's, getting to know them when they're candidates. We'll have a few dozen, I think, contested races this year, but there are already probably a few dozen members who are going to win. They've won their primaries. We know they're going to be members of Congress next year. Start talking to them now. Start going to their campaign events in the district, start getting to know them when they're in DC, depending on where you are. Get in very early with them when they're still figuring out what their positions are and, what they're what their priorities are gonna be. Because I think that, kind of to the earlier discussion around members come in and have to learn about fee-for-service versus MA and everything else. And most of the time when you're campaigning in broad themes. I'm gonna protect Medicare, I'm gonna protect Social Security. So then we come in and say, well, you're saying protect Medicare. That means protecting Medicare Advantage also. So,
Yeah, I think 535 members is a lot, and it's a lot to try and get to know exactly what they think. What I would say, and I would talk to the allies and say, you help us as you are talking to them. If you find out there's a member that really wants to get involved in healthcare, and they know that they're not going to be on a committee, tell us. We'll go cultivate that now. You may find, though, that there's members that all I want to do is be on armed services and all I want to do is weapon systems. Probably not our guy. Probably not where we're going to put in the top tier. But we do have so many limited resources that we do have to think about it strategically, and we do want to grow the farm team, and we want to do it the smart way. There are going to be people that we're going to try. They're just not interested. Okay, we do the best we can. But if you hear somebody, oh, this person is on point. They know their stuff. They want to do it. They want to be involved in Medicare Advantage. Tell us. We'll use that. We'll go in and develop that relationship. And then you never know where that staff goes. You don't know where the member goes. You just don't know. And you've got to play the long game here. So, we'll do the best we can in touching all of those 535. But if you have feedback, let us know.
Last question, and I won't ask you to comment on the presidential, but if you in your world were to guess, are you working with a Democratic Senate or a Republican Senate? And the same for the House.
I think a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, but also it's not going to be, we were talking earlier about those super majorities back when I was on the Hill in 09 and 10, where there were 200, we had 260 Democrats. We're not going to go back. I don't think we'll ever get back to that, just with how divided I think our politics are now, where either way it'll be within a majority of maybe 5, 6, 7 votes. And depending on that situation, we may see a very similar thing as we saw last year, where you have to find that governing majority in the middle who wants to pass things because of folks on either end who maybe don't want to vote for anything.
Yeah, I agree on the Senate. I think the map just favors the Republicans. If they can't get it this year, they're not going to for quite some time. I tend to think that the Republican majority is going to hold, but I think there's a lot of seats that are going to switch out. There are members in states that are going to have a little bit better advantage. One being North Carolina is adding a seat to, like, I think there's some local geography pieces that help them there. I think the Californians have a really tough go on the Republican side. So I think you can swap out some members, but I think Republicans will net a couple of extra seats in the House as of right now. But we're 6 weeks away, and it's a lifetime.
Yeah, like Nathan said, none of us have looked at our phones for the last hour, so we don't know what's.
Exactly right.
I mean, I'll say, just think of 6 weeks ago when we had a different candidate for president on the Democratic side.
Yeah, it was a series of 3 weekends where a lot changed by weekend. I asked you that question, not expecting those answers necessarily exactly, but the fact is we're going into a season where come November 6th, we will have a better idea, maybe not a perfectly clear idea, but we'll have a better idea where things land, but they're not going to land one way or the other in such a way that we don't need to be working collectively with that governing majority, whatever it becomes and whoever that is. And we would just ask all of you to continue to partner with us on the Better Medicare side, on the advocacy side. We can try to do this on our own, but we'll be much, much better with you. And then also back home in the districts and in the states, we need you as well, because it's very hard for three fellows here to influence 535 districts and then 50 states. Did I just do those numbers right? Thank you. It's been a long day. I do appreciate it. I want to thank first Brian for sitting between two Chris's and being able to keep that straight. But I do want to thank both of you for the work that you've done being advocates with great integrity, but also carrying our message consistently forward. I think we have a few minutes to open it up for questions. Please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for speaking to us. I'm Philo Hall from Epstein, Becker, and Green. I'm going to follow up on the advocacy questions perspectives, but maybe in a little more pointed fashion. So I think first and foremost, certainly we understand that Medicare Advantage may be one of the most successful industries in general in advocacy. If you look at it, that one of the few healthcare industries that has successfully protected itself from congressional cuts to payment rates or cuts for pay-fors, the way a whole lot of other health industries have been tapped in recent years. But on another hand, there are a number of plans and other MA stakeholders who have frustrations in Congress maybe not being as welcoming to the program as it was maybe 15 years ago, where we still had that MA founding generation in Congress. And that's seen in reluctance to push back against CMS, where we maybe were successful in the Obama administration, maybe pushing back, having Congress weigh in to strongly push back against some adverse advance notices or technical rules in 2014, but not having that sort of willingness to see a problem or to have Congress act upon same types of threats coming out of the new risk adjustment model, for example, where we have a lot of stakeholders who are seeing cuts 3 to 6%, or with a low income population, high chronic condition population. Those are the plan populations that are being hit the hardest under this new risk adjustment model, and where we have provider groups going into Congress where they have the relationships and where they can document that our members are seeing their co-pays increase and they're seeing their supplemental benefits cuts. So I was going to ask, how do we, what more specifically is needed to motivate Congress to weigh in against CMS when they have momentum? But maybe I will rephrase it as, what makes congressional offices comfortable in saying no to weighing in against CMS?
You wanna go first? So I think good question. I think one of the things that we need to do a better job on, and this is on us as much as anybody, is following through. We talk a lot about the rate notice, and this is we've been talking to a lot of folks this year about. Okay, we need to go back and explain. Okay, we talked about this. You may not remember this way back in February, and then this is what was in the proposed rule. This is how it netted out, and these are the impacts in your district. I think we need to do a better job to bring that life cycle and take that back to the staff. Now, the challenge is that's 8 to 10 months apart, right? Staff may not be the same. They've got a bunch of other things. Or we can go see them in October when open enrollment starts? No, because the members aren't here, right? We'll talk to the staff. So I think CMS has on their side the process, right? And they just work the process. And that's their kind of view is like, oh, we got yelled at. We'll just kind of put our head down for a while and then see what happens and see if they yell at us again. We need to make sure we do. And we need to draw that circle. What I would say is I think you're right that members haven't been really focused on pushing back because they've not felt that backside. I think they're going to see that this year. I think those plans are looking at those cuts 3%, 4%, 5% year over year for the last 3 years, and things are going to change. And then why are they pulling out? Why are those benefits not the same? And then if the seniors start to say that too, you're starting to bring stuff together. I hope you never want that to happen. You never want to talk about a negative, but we have to start drawing what CMS is doing to the actual actions that beneficiaries are seeing back home to their constituents. It may not be in time for this election, but we need to make sure that stays in their minds.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think to kind of Brian's point earlier about kind of targeting the members, I think that one thing that I think over the past couple years has been laid bare is I think there was broad support for Medicare Advantage, but it was a little bit shallow. And I think to kind of your question there about, we have a couple dozen members who, will make those phone calls, who will go beyond the extra mile and who will kind of dig deep and call the White House and call the secretary and call the administrator. And so I think that it's, focusing more on those and, deepening those as well. And, to Brian's point, I think that's exactly, I think, one thing that we have heard on the Hill before as well, we hear from you every, January, February, March during the rate notice season, and then it's quiet for the rest of the year. So I think that's exactly right of following through with here are the real world implications of what happened last year. We weren't crying wolf. Now there are, deductibles are higher and $0 premiums are going away and supplemental benefits are being cut. And it's exactly that. It's following through and making sure people see those real world implications and hearing from it back home of here are the people that are hurt by this back home.
I think one of the things that makes us effective is that, at least on our side, we get spoken to loudly every day. It's not just a seasonal thing. We have to take questions every day and answer them. What I will add is that I think that we're used to talking in big ways, which we should, but we do know that Medicare Advantage is a very, very local issue. Mm-hmm. The numbers that we know go down to the district level, and we have to start speaking to members, including in a period of change, about what it really means to their constituency in blank zip code or blank county, because that's a very different discussion than getting in a fight between MFA and repealing the ACA, which is where a lot of these members sit. And so I do think that it's imperative on us as a community to really get intentional about talking what matters most to them at the most local level. We have time for one more question.
Try to make it quick. Thanks, yeah. Tyler Haskell from Santa Clara Family Health Plan.
Yeah.
Thank you for the great conversation. We had some conversation yesterday with Congressman Guthrie about prior authorization. And I just wonder what any of you are hearing, or whether you think the Timely Access to Care for Seniors Act is going to pass this year, going to be included in a year-end package or standalone or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one limitation on that bill, and I think it's been gaining support, has been the cost, right? And, there's a significant costs associated with adding this. With CMS's regulatory actions, that diminishes the cost. It's not zero. It's not free because of just some technical scoring methodologies until they actually implement it. And so there's a chance that gets codified. As a policy staffer, I'm always leery of codifying things that CMS does because you need statutory changes then to go ahead and do something different in the future. What if they get it wrong? What if we do this for 5 years and go, boy, there's something else and really need CMS to do something different, and they go, our hands are tied. So like I always caution about simply codifying something for the headline. Again, I'm a policy person. That was my job. I would advise people on it. But as I talk to members, I think that's a real concern. The question about CMS is they have huge regulatory authorities. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And sometimes we want members to weigh in. So we might see it. I think so. To answer your question, one, I think the scoring needs to come down. They're not going to pay for something that CMS is already doing. Mm-hmm. And then two, there are some concerns about whether or not we want to codify this and really tie CMS's hands in the future.
Yeah. No, and I think I would just add, I think that, that is, I think, prior authorization is probably one of the issues we hear about most on the Hill. And I think that's where I think, BMA working with y'all has been so effective in being kind of, very proactive in supporting positive changes to the program that would benefit seniors here. And I think got a lot of credit and a lot of credibility on the Hill for, I think, being out in front and endorsing that bill early on. So.
And I'll just close in saying that my sense is that getting anything, even of the most bipartisans of pieces of legislation done in December is going to be super tough. Yeah. Especially anything that has a score on it. Don't want to be a downer there at all, but I just am trying to be realistic about what's going to happen in that zone. We all have really big ideas about what could happen, and we will push aggressively. But there's a lot that doesn't get done at the end of the day in December. Any December.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, obviously, at the end of the year, we have, as Brian was mentioning, we have community health center funding expiring. We have those telehealth flexibilities expiring. If there is a big package of doing that in a longer term way, but we could also see those punted to early next year.
Well, and I think that's just it, right? I think we all think end of the year, December 15th, tie it in a bow, we all go home, that's not how it has been. I don't think it will be this year. Mm-hmm. So I think end of the year bleeds into next year.
We've had a lot of end of year packages in March.
Yeah, I was going to say March, April, May would probably not be shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So one snowy Christmas Eve, I recall them passing a major piece of health legislation out of the Senate. There's always that. We really do appreciate everybody. We appreciate your time. Know that we are resources, but y'all probably know as much as we do. So we'd like to hear from you. This is a group effort that's not going to end, and it's something that we're going to need to all play together on. So thank you.